Hi everyone, welcome to our webinar today. We're going to be talking about leveraging AI in the law and finding the right implementation journey. We've got a lot of people joining us today. We've had about 350 registrations for this webinar, which is indicative of the need for this type of very practical conversation around generative AI and your implementation journeys. We've got an amazing panel today. I'm Caroline Hill. I'm Editor-in-Chief of Legal IT Insider. I'm just your host for today. We are here talking with UK-headquartered client payments and compliance software provider Legl. So many of you will know my panel today. They're very well known. We've got, starting with Julia Salasky. So Julia is Legl's CEO. She's a former Linklaters lawyer. She then went on to work for the United Nations as a lawyer before founding Crowd Justice, which helps people to fund legal action. She founded Legl in 2019 with a view to simplifying legal operations by using technology. Hi, Julia. Did I get that right?
Excellent. Thank you so much. Great to be here.
We are here with Legl CTO, Matt Jarrod. Matt joined Legl in 2021 as VP of Engineering. He was made CTO in May last year, and Matt has held various roles in industries, including he's worked for a festival experience hub called Festikit, global transportation platform Karoo, and a company that everyone will know, BAE Systems. Hi, Matt.
Hello. Nice to be here.
No, yeah, no, thank you. Thanks for joining me. And then last but not least, we've got Crispin Passmore, who is an experienced legal management consultant, both in the UK and US legal market. He's a former executive director of the Solicitors Regulation Authority. He's held roles including policy director of the Legal Services Commission, strategy director of the Legal Services Board, and he was an advisor to Crowd Justice and has been an advisor to Legl from the outset. Is that right, Crispin?
It is. It's been a fabulous journey to watch them go along and do some impressive work. Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone joining us. You're doing what I was going to ask you to do, which is to enact your chat function. We've all done this many, many times. You almost don't need to say it anymore. Obviously say who you are, where you're from. You haven't needed me to say it. You're doing it. Thank you so much. It's great to have so many people listening in. It's a testament to our panel and who have agreed that they are very happy for you to jump in and ask questions at any point during the conversation. We want to make this interactive. The guys, one of the reasons, before we sort of move into the chat, one of the ways that Julia and I got talking was because I was having a conversation with her about something else, and she started talking about some work she was doing with a firm actually implementing generative AI to help them with their onboarding and compliance. And I said, well, and so yeah, they're really happy, and they're showing, you know, that they're saving 10% of time doing X, Y, Z. And I said, well, why are we not talking about this? So now I've written an article, and now thankfully we have them on here to talk a bit, well, a lot actually, about the work that they're doing. Matt in particular is very much involved on the implementation side. So if you have technical questions, as I'm sure you will, you perhaps would direct them to Matt, but all of us on the panel will be very happy to answer and direct your questions. If for the panel, everyone we've got a very, very busy guest list audience today. So if everybody on the panel would like to keep an eye on questions and jump in as you wish. We like to have a fairly organized chaos on these webinars. As I said, we're going to keep it practical, but I just wanted as a preface to ask you what, at a high level, I suppose, what you're seeing in the market in terms of how firms are responding to the onset of generative AI. This is quite a broad question, almost to the point of being meaningless, but I really wanted to kind of get your feel as to what you're seeing in the market and how firms are responding, and anyone can jump in with their thoughts as well. Julia.
Yeah, I'm happy to kick off, and it is a very broad question, and I think we do see a pretty broad range of thoughts and ideas across the industry. Right. So we work with about 300 law firms in the UK, about 30 in the top 200. So it's a pretty broad range that we see. And I would say that the approach to generative AI has been similarly broad. So we see a range of firms who are really thinking about this strategically. What are the white space problems that they need to solve? How do they think from first principles about what this means for their business in the short term, in the medium term, in the long term? And what are the quick wins versus sort of wait and see approach? We see some firms that are looking at their technology stack more broadly and actually trying to see where the vendors that they have today are implementing AI solutions that make their lives easier, make their fee earners' life easier, and their delivery of client services better. And then we're seeing some firms that are trying to build things in-house themselves. So Matt and I got together and wrote an article on this last week, but like one of the things that we've seen is a lot of chatbot kind of interfaces whereby firms are looking at their internal data sets and their internal knowledge sources and trying to produce, whether it's Q&A, whether it's sort of initiating the ability to look at existing documentation, ask questions of it. And some firms are looking at kind of things they were looking at before Gen AI became such a hot topic around contract generation and contract review in particular. So that's sort of a high level, the gamut of what we're seeing across the firms that we work with.
Does anyone want to add anything to that? Crispin, I'm quite curious as to your sort of take on it.
I sort of think it splits into three camps really, and I tend to ignore the first two. The first camp are the sort of the evangelists that think the world's going to change probably by close of Friday, and if you haven't taken steps towards that, you might as well pack up and go home. At the opposite end are the non-believers that think this is sort of a faith thing. Yeah, we keep saying I can't see a use case. I can't see a use case for this. But actually in the middle are the people that are trying to think of it much more practically about what's the problem that I've got and how might this help me solve it? And just using the opportunity to think, well, okay, there's a new technology that I'm hearing about. What are people doing that will help me solve problems that I haven't been able to solve before? And client onboarding is one that I'm sure we'll keep coming back to, but that seems to me to be an area for really focusing on. But I think smart firms are thinking cleverly about what are the things that help us do what we do better, separately to how might this technology impact on the structure of law firms and the delivery of the legal market over the next 1, 5, 10, 20 years, and what does that mean for my business?
Yeah, sure, that makes a lot of sense. Let's talk practically. So I know legals, obviously, thanks, Julia, for prefacing, describing some of the work, albeit at a high level. Matt, so what stage are firms that legal is working with at in terms of testing, trialing new technologies? If you want to do, we want to make this really practical. I don't know if it takes a while for everyone to filter in. So just wanted to emphasize that the purpose of this conversation, it's great that we've got you to provide different takes. Like Matt has got a lot of experience of working with firms on some kind of knotty implementation problems. So by all means, post at any time in the chat if you've got questions, because we want to make this as practical as possible rather than sort of high level. And Julia's been very clear about that. We're hoping that people we know who we've got here, and everybody has enough sophistication to need more than just highfalutin talk that we were doing last year. But Matt, coming back to you, so what stage, tell us a bit about the sort of firms that you're working with and the sort of problems that you're trying to work on.
Sure. So we've, as Julia said, we've got quite we've got about 300 law firms that use our product today. They're thereabouts, and they range quite a bit in terms of size, in terms of the type of work that they do. So there's quite a big range of problems there, and as Julia said, they're approaching it in quite different ways. Some looking at, can they, based on their understanding of what the technology can do and the new sort of exciting applications of it, can they build something in-house or use a third party to build something in-house that they wouldn't have been able to do well before? So that could be better search and retrieval of information across knowledge. That could be implementing it into parts of different parts of their operational processes. but we've seen a variety of different approaches there. And obviously we last year launched our first AI-powered product, which has been really well received, and the focus of that has been at a high level, I guess, reducing the cognitive load in decision making and taking a variety of data sources and trying to provide a sort of use AI for reasoning and highlighting what is important, and that makes the user's task easier. And so that's the kind of approach that we've been thinking about, is how to do things slightly smarter, as in taking the next step beyond just sort of providing data or moving data back and forth, but what is an additional layer that we can provide with use of these technologies, and hopefully make the job a little bit easier in those cases.
Are you able to talk a bit about specifically about the clients and the onboarding and compliance work that you've been doing? I know you've got a couple of really interesting. What's great actually is you've got a couple of really interesting reference sites as well, which is, it's always helpful to people like me when there is a lot of talk to hear firms saying themselves, you know, they've saved us this amount of time. But are you able to focus on that specifically in terms of the types of work that you've been doing?
Sorry, in terms of what we've how we've got those firms specifically.
Yeah, the sort of solutions that you've been coming up with that. Yeah.
So our product that we launched, which, as you said, a bunch of it's been rolled out across the product. So lots of our firms are using it and saving time through their CDD processes within onboarding workflows typically, but it's part of the CDD KYC process that we offer, that law firms can basically take some, whether that's a new client or existing client that they're trying to run a CDD process on. We take data from a bunch of different sources, and then we're able to support the decision-making process in actually getting that to a result. So that's the first implementation that we launched last year, and then we've been experimenting throughout the last many months on lots of different ways that we could be using AI technologies and generative AI in particular in different parts of the product. So that's probably getting on to maybe the next part of the conversation, perhaps, which is like practically how do you go about getting from, you know, we have an idea of what these technologies can do, and what are the actual practical steps to implementing that into a process or making use of that within part of your technology stack.
And Caroline, if I can jump in on that as well, just in terms of again, like the implementation piece of law firms' journeys, I think the way that we at Legl have approached this is, we as a SaaS product are deeply embedded within a lot of firms' operational workflows. And I think what firms are starting to see across all of their SaaS applications are that actually you can go from being a platform that's automating tasks, that's enabling, you know, workflows within a firm, and actually you can make those smarter and you can make those more determinative. And that's what Matt's describing about what we've done at Legl. And I think when we look at what the law firms we're working with are thinking about, some of them are saying, hey, we have a problem and we want to think about how AI can solve it. And other firms are thinking about, hey, we've got all of these SaaS applications and actually they're solving the problems we have today. But actually, if we look at their roadmap, if we look at what they're rolling out, this might end up solving some of the problems that we would otherwise like get an AI point solution in to solve. And so that's the way that we're approaching it as a SaaS platform is, we solve all of these problems today, and actually we can add a huge amount of value through layering in Gen AI technologies into the workflows that we're already working on today. So a law firm might come to us and say, we have this problem, which is the problem Matt's describing, which is we're doing these complex compliance processes through legal, and the results we're getting back because we're providing them so much data, they might say, actually, it takes us longer than it did before to review these results, because before we were doing it manually and we didn't have any hits, and now we've got hits. So we say, okay, we're going to analyze all of those hits and all of the results and all of the data and use contextual data to say determinatively, the analysis shows like probably this is, you should take this X direction or Y direction. And so it adds like value to kind of practical problems that are being faced day to day. And you can see that you can see objectively within the product that if you have it versus if you don't have it, it's saving significant amounts of time from a review and analysis point of view. So I think from a bigger picture of like, how do you think about your technology stack, and how do you think about the different data sources that you have today and what you can do with that data? There's a lot of applications of Gen AI, and some might be within your SaaS, applications roadmaps today, and some might be problems that are unique to you as a firm that you need to think about that data in a different way, and how are you going to extract it and how are you going to analyze it? And that's some of the things we think a lot about, because we integrate with a lot of other providers that law firms use. And what we find is that the data sources can be quite disparate and siloed. And the way that AI is going to work best is if you have access to the whole data set that you need in order to look at, whatever analysis you're doing.
It makes a lot of sense. So yeah, CDD Assist. So just in case we did say the name, didn't we? Yeah, so it's interesting. Because it would take a whole team of people, wouldn't it? When you've got all of these disparate data sources, that it takes a lot of people. And I know we said that it saves about, is that right, 10%? Is that what you found the time saving to be? Something?
Yeah, so within our, we can see that just with this specific application, it's pre-using Gen AI within our product and post, it's about a 15% time saving. But when you think about that is on a reasonably high volume kind of piece of analysis. And so 15% of time itself adds up, but the really meaningful output is that if this is something where you would have had to go back and forth to the client, back and forth to the client, back and forth to the client, it's actually means that you can speed up. In this case, some firms are showing that they've seen things like they've sped up onboarding by 90%, or they've had drop-off rates where they're going back and forth with the client. One firm we spoke to yesterday, a big firm, has seen drop-off rates reduced from 25% at that phase to 15%. So like literally they're just getting 10% more clients instruct them. And so these things can have like significant knock-on consequences just because actually you're reducing back and forth with the client in this particular kind of more discrete use case.
Let's talk about, and in the chat, do say, tell us if you've got if your interest is around, if you're just interested because this is a practical conversation around Gen AI from people who are implementing it regularly, and or if it's because you're particularly interested in the onboarding and compliance angle. So it'd be interesting and useful if you can post in the chat if there's anything that you want us to cover, because we've got access to the panel today. So do shout, please. So tell me, Matt, about you touched on it and then we moved away, but you were very helpfully guiding me to the next question, which was about how you identify the problems. What practical steps when you're sort of thinking about solutions, what are the practical steps you take in order to work out what the solution is?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I can definitely talk about the process that we followed and continue to. But first off, I think one of the challenges almost is that when you start playing around with generative AI technologies, large language models, they're quite impressive. The latest and greatest language models from people like OpenAI are able to do quite a lot out of the box in a way, and that you can prompt or question it in some way, and you get a pretty good response to whatever you give it. It can solve sort of or reason or is knowledgeable about a lot of different topics. So that actually creates a challenge in its own way, that it's very tempting to start with a really, really broad problem and see, okay, is this something we can solve by applying this technology? And that's one of our early learnings, I guess, was we really had to start big and look at what problems can we solve, or what opportunities do we have to improve things, but then break that down into what are the specific hypotheses, experiments that we can run to see how can we use large language models in this case to solve this problem or to improve this process. So we did a lot of brainstorming, a lot of thinking, a lot of looking at our product and law firm processes, and basically came out with a very long set of hypotheses and ideas for where we could start. And then we really had to break that down into small pieces for experimentation. And one of the things that we found quite challenging, actually, in some cases, was what does success and failure look like? Because it's not, you may have a lot of different circumstances, a lot of different context, or use cases that you're trying to apply the language model to, but you can only do so much testing or only cover so much ground. So it's sometimes quite difficult to say, do we feel confident that this is adding value here, or that this is making this significantly easier, or that this is doing a good job of wherever we're applying it. So we really had to think quite carefully about, for any of the experiments we were doing, just sort of trying things internally, what would a good response look like, or what would a bad response look like? So that was quite interesting, and through a process of testing, refining, hitting roadblocks, learning about new techniques and approaches to getting the responses that we were looking for, we sort of made progress, basically.
We've got quite a lot of, I want to quickly ask you about the types of exercises that you've gone through, but I want to also encourage people we've got a lot of questions, I don't want to lose track. So maybe we'll come to the questions in the chat because it's great. Everyone, thank you very much for posting. So what are the good public data sources to fine tune the models? We're going to be jumping around. Is that all right with you guys? We're going to be jumping. So that's Matt question.
Public data sets, is that, sorry?
What are the good public data sources to fine tune the models?
Yeah, we to be honest haven't spent too much time trying to do very general training of a model for with large data sets. So any training that we've done is taking actually very small or specific data sets that we've created ourselves and saying, given this input, we'd like to see more of this kind of output. The large scale training that somebody like OpenAI or Anthropic or other language model companies and organizations that are actually building language models is not something we've tried to do, and there's lots of reasons why that's quite hard. So finding a suitable data set is obviously very difficult, and that's a challenge that there's a bit of a sort of a war of data going on with large technology companies that are building those language models.
I can add to that, perhaps. I think there's more in the US. There's more public data sources available in the US. The courts are thinking about it there. There's a huge public data source called Kelvin Legal Data, which is several billion tokens of data, which is to train LLMs on. And there's been pressure put in the UK on the Ministry of Justice to start doing this. But we've got to be honest and say, UK government's been slow to act on this. And if people want to do something as a result today, put pressure on the UK government to mark up data and make it usable.
I couldn't agree more, Crispin. Actually, I think that's one of the things with litigation, tools that the US has led the way for a long time because of PACER and the other sources that you mentioned. I think that it is starting to get better. You've got some Supreme Court judgments that are now available publicly that weren't before. But yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. There's so maybe if there's some questions that perhaps we can deal with in the chat, maybe about unexpected outcomes. I don't know if that's a Julia question, if you want to answer that now or in the chat, from Sarah Law.
I can take that quickly. The question is if there's unexpected outcomes, and I think there's to answer the question directly, in fact, the outcome of there being too much data was pre-using Gen AI, and that's just from essentially automating processes where you're having a lot of data sources as inputs. And what Gen AI has allowed us to do is actually analyze what is typically a human task of saying, oh, there's a result that's been flagged, and that's the result of having quite a voluminous amount of data. And what Gen AI has allowed us to do is say, is do an analysis of those data sources for the law firm customer, for the user. In terms of the question, which I think is the real question there, which is like, what happens when there is an unexpected result? The way that we've done it within our UI is enabled the person using the product to give feedback as to whether, like, thumbs up, thumbs down, whether the result has been helpful. And when it's a thumbs down, they give additional context, and then we're able to feed that back into our understanding, back into our prompts. And that's been, that's a really useful way to continuously improve. Yeah, so I think that's the mythology of hallucination is real, but it's also, I think it's more, we have not found that has been a problem at all. And I think actually what's interesting is as the models continue to get better and better, these products are only going to get better and better. Yeah. I don't know, Matt, if there's anything to add to that.
No, I think that's exactly right. Really, the feedback is obviously really important, and that's, as I said, like what success and failure looks like is sometimes quite hard to know in advance. So getting that feedback from users, I think, is really important in terms of making an implementation of any generative AI successful.
There's a question about I'm going to paraphrase, but so should you build this in-house? So actually I will read it. So given OpenAI, other LLMs are the basis for both commercial off-the-shelf solutions, as well as what firms might be developing in-house, are you seeing any material difference in the benefit of Gen AI, whether using commercial Gen AI solutions or in-house? I.e., would you recommend firms who have in-house capability to develop in-house, or would you advise to buy off the shelf? This is something that we've talked about before the webinar, actually. And I know Crispin says, don't build yourself. Anybody can answer that.
Well, I mean, I can go with a couple of things. I think, I guess, as with any sort of software implementation, there's quite a lot of challenges involved. And I think we learned a lot through building our first product, and some of those are, I guess, classical software engineering problems in some way. So that's data security and privacy concerns, that's speed, that's capacity, cost, etc. But then prompt engineering and how to get the best out of language models is a different skill set. And there isn't, if it's not something that you've played around with before, it's quite time consuming, it's difficult, there's not sort of a standard way to approach it necessarily. It does take a lot of trial and error, and that can be just quite time consuming and expensive, essentially. So I think there's obviously pros and cons to, okay, if you're taking an off-the-shelf or commercial solution, is that going to solve exactly the problem that you're trying to solve, versus it's going to be that you're going to find lots of challenges and may not it may not be obvious from the outset if you can solve the problems that you're trying to, I think is one of the things that we learned.
Yeah, I think a lot of people just simply in-house. I think it's got to be subjective, hasn't it? A lot of people, if you've got the capability, if you've got the resource, of course, but a lot of firms that I speak to, even the bigger firms, have said to me they're going to be relying on vendors with the expertise because the risks are great, right? That unless you've got really sufficient expertise, which it's really hard to build in-house, then I think it becomes something that a lot of firms will be relying on partners, by which they mean business partners.
Go further, Caroline, actually. Even if you've got the capability to do this stuff in a law firm or a legal business, you should think really carefully before thinking we can build this themselves. You might have people that could build something to replace Microsoft Office. You might have people in your office that could, do the plumbing in your offices, but it's still better to get in experts. Investors and leaders of law firms will say, no, let's focus on the things that are unique about this business, that is our core expertise in the market, and outsource everything else we possibly can. There's a reason why we make progress as an economy, and it's the division of labour, not each of us doing everything ourselves.
Love that, doing the plumbing, that's brilliant.
There's another factor, I guess, which is the technology is moving really, really fast.
Yeah.
We've all seen that over the last year. Language models, GPT-4 comes out and suddenly there's a step change in what is possible with that technology. And so, and I think for anyone trying to keep up with that is difficult. And obviously, if you've solved a problem and it works, and you can continue to use that, but there's going to be a continued race to make more and more use of that technology in smarter ways. So
Yeah,
I can add to that is I think there's like a real difference between solving operational problems that you have today, and to some extent solving substantive legal questions. How do you deliver better client services, and actually really thinking long term, how do we transform our business model, and actually what are the steps in between? Is it actually solving operational problems using vendors, whether they use Gen AI or not? If they're solving a problem, doesn't matter. And then it's actually, if in 10 years time you want to transform your business model, you want to transform your charging model, actually how are you thinking about the technology you need to do that, the tooling you need, the people you need to do that? And I think that might inform a build versus buy decision as well, in terms of how profound is the problem you're trying to solve? Is it a problem you're already solving today, or a problem you want to solve tomorrow? Or is this a 5, 10-year, 20-year problem? And one of the things that we've thought a lot about is the data sets of law firms, and where are these, and actually laying the foundation for having better Gen AI use cases in future is actually probably starting with where is your data today, and how siloed is it, and in how many different tools is it, and do those tools talk to each other, which is something law firms think about all the time anyway. But from a kind of what do you buy and where does it sit, and which data does it sit on top of, that's really critical.
Yeah, and actually on the point about things moving really faster and prompt engineering, I want to come back to that in terms of what, because firms also need to be thinking about what's next, practically, don't they, in terms of, are they sort of adapting? And that's something where if you've got a third party, they can be advising you on that. I just want to come to, Doug McKenzie, if there are 3 specific legal processes out of CDD onboarding rising out of use cases from Gen AI, what might these be based on client interaction from legal Passmore consulting? Anyone?
Yeah, this is can do a separate session on our roadmap, Doug, if you if you want. But there's the way that we think about the AI applications within the processes that we're in is a lot of what we do is automating different business processes, a lot around compliance and payments, but risk management generally. And all of those things we're automating processes, they require human analysis at some level. So the things that we're thinking about and that we're delivering over the next couple of months, a lot of them have to do with taking all of the data that the firm is collecting in various guises and giving more determinative approaches to how do you reduce kind of the mental load, the cognitive load on your team to make complex decisions that are based on, SRA guidance, LSAG guidance, your firm's policies, and actually say, based on all of this information, here's a provisional answer for you, and this is why we've come to that answer. So we're doing that across the sort of risk and compliance stack. And a lot of it, I see some other questions in here around some of the other applications that are really exciting, I think, for any kind of client-facing operational process, but is how do you collect the data you need with the fewest touch points in relation to your client, and how do you get the right data? So that could be in the risk and compliance space, there is a lot of trying to understand your client without kind of badgering them, and with getting the data that you have and then going to them only with what you really need, and then serving that back in a structured way that means that you've got all of that data in one place, and it gives you a kind of next step. And I think that's the future of we see that as the future of SaaS, and being in the space where we're touching on a lot of like sensitive regulated processes. We have to get that right, and we want the ability for law firms to both get that right, but reduce the like manual human error that goes into like assessing information, vast quantities of information against the kind of client experience of going back and forth with matching that against your regulatory requirements. I hope that sort of summarizes, but there's quite a lot. I think we started with
covering a lot of ground. You touched on it. There are a few questions on that space. So whenever I write about this topic, obviously the subject of privacy, of regulation, the regulatory position, which seems to me to be far from black and white. So we're going to do some questions around that space now, which seems to make sense. So Crispin, this one's for you. So given your experience working with regulators worldwide, what common challenges do you observe, and how do you assist them in modernizing their regulatory approach?
So I think the UK's in a reasonably good position on this because it's a liberal regime. It doesn't want to control and prescribe or even know about the detail of law firms' processes. It just sets standards and holds them to it. And it doesn't have an unauthorised practice of law regime, and it has got entity regulation. But when I talk to regulators around the rest of the world, from the US and Canada to Southeast Asia into Europe and elsewhere, actually they're facing up to a challenge of a regulatory system built for a pre-industrial age, not just for a pre-AI age. Where they have everything restricted to only lawyers can do this, and it leads towards a bespoke model. Lawyers start with a client in front of them in much the same way as they did 50 or 60 years ago, ask them some questions and then give them some advice. Regulators are starting to think about, what does this mean for the unauthorized practice of law? Who can provide information? Who can give basic advice? Clients are already getting it off Google. They're already getting it off ChatGPT, and 80% right is better than 0% right. And clients are the judge of that, not lawyers. So they're already doing it. So you might as well, as a regulator, embrace the fact that the question is not, should we allow this? It's, should we regulate this? And that leads you very quickly into, as a regulator, thinking about moving towards entity regulation and not being so bothered who owns that business. It doesn't matter if it's a technology business or some lawyers. It's, what are the standards? What do we expect of people that are giving legal services to people? So, breaking down the barriers of restricting this to a monopoly of lawyers and introducing entity regulation are the themes around the world for legal regulators. There's all sorts of pulls around how you regulate AI, and we could do another few hour seminar on that. But there's not an obvious answer to where we're heading, because there are protectionist pressures and there are sort of economically more obvious answers, which are about trying to embrace this stuff and set standards. I don't know which way we'll go in the end.
Yeah, it's interesting. Do you think, you can say the decline's quiet, do you think the regulators have been forthcoming enough in terms of early guidance? Is that a hard question? Is that something you'd like to ask?
Everyone wants the regulator to say, yes, you can do this, or no, you can't do that, or the such. And that's law firms, individual lawyers, and legal technology providers. They all want the regulator to say, yeah, you can do this. But there's a danger as a regulator, because the moment you say, yes, you can do this, it leads to the question of, well, can you do that? Can you go further? And everyone wants to freeze the world around the current capabilities. as a regulator, it's much better, in my view, to say we're absolutely clear about the standards you must achieve, but actually it's all about a bit fuzzy about how you get there. That's your choice. Regulators are not trying to create an homogenous market. They're trying to create a competitive one which drives innovation and drives people to do things differently. And part of that is some people will take risk and they'll get things wrong. Well, that's how the world moves forward, and we just need to embrace that. So, my message to regulators is hold the line and do nothing wherever you possibly can. And if your stuff's in the way, don't write new rules, tear up the ones you've got.
Love that. We've got a question on data privacy. I'm surprised it didn't come up sooner, but thank you. So I'm not going to read the whole question but it's how do you tackle the concern of data privacy and data protection when you deploy generative AI within a customer? It's quite a broad question, but you can obviously speak for yourselves. Can you address it? It's really important, obviously.
Yeah, sure. So the way that we've approached this is using so Microsoft basically have a partnership with OpenAI, which we make use of their product, Microsoft's product, which means that the language model is delivered within an environment that we control. So no data goes outside of that. We know where it is, and there's a contractual obligation that Microsoft has around that. So we do that to solve those problems, but it's definitely across different products. It's quite different. So we've had to be very cautious about, is this a language model that we can work with? Is this tool something that we can think about? Because a lot of them are not. Don't have options around where that data is processed or hosted. And then there are obviously other concerns around, are they using that data for training their own models, or is there anything else happening with that outside of just the response and request and response that we're using it for? So it's definitely something that, as with any other piece of technology, you've got to look at the small print around the data privacy side of things. Yeah.
I don't know. The second part of this question is really interesting, actually, but I'm not sure. I mean, this comes up all the time with document management, etc. But so I'm going to read it anyway, see what you think, and how much it comes up in your world. So AI, it's such a big issue. AI has access to the full data pool, including sensitive data that might not be appropriately classified or tagged by the business. As we move to kind of need to know, this was something that we've been talking about for a long time. Most firms are aware of the need to lock data down, but a lot of the new technologies, we don't know if they respect those boundaries. So what do you do about that? And how much does that apply in your day-to-day?
Well, in terms of, as I said, we have assurances from suppliers that have commitments around their data privacy and the protections that they have in place. So we do obviously rely on those. There is, to an extent, I think, as Julia touched on before, the maturity of your data infrastructure is an important factor, as in, do you have data tagged and classified appropriately? Do you know what sits within your unstructured data that you might want to share with an AI system in some form? Obviously, if you have better infrastructure and knowledge of your own data, then you can make more informed decisions around how you use that. So I think that's a big factor, but it's hard to see exactly how things like copyright and other concerns like that may play out. But I think in terms of data security and privacy, it's much like using any other cloud system, assuming you have the commitments from the providers that they're not going to use your data in a way that they're different to how they say.
Can I just say something kind of about how law firms handle data at the moment? They train their lawyers on previous clients' data. That's why we pay lawyers lots of money when we want advice. It's because they've done this before, and they've got experience, and we expect them to have templates. Well, where do they get their templates from? They've done it before. So
Very Christmas can like the good KM teams blank the names out, don't they? Like
so they do. But I think when I talk to law firm people about how data is managed and how they lock down information within their law firm, they don't very much. They're very strong boundaries around the edge of the law firm, but actually, other than on market sensitive type information, actually individual lawyers have pretty much free range across an awful lot of case management systems. That is a much bigger real world compliance legal PR risk than deploying OpenAI or legal's technology into your technology stack, where there are controls and there aren't people walking out the door with a briefcase full of papers and leaving it in the pub.
I think if any firm to this day has not got some kind of need to know policy where they restrict access, then, you know, given the stats on insider, on where most data breaches come from, I think that we should be doing another webinar on that.
We should. Large law firms, lots of them.
Yeah, true.
Also, on that question, I think there's also a couple of different there's like a couple of different angles to it. One is what Matt's describing, which is like, where is your data stored, and can the LLM train it? And we've made very conscious decisions, as he said, where, you know, to use Microsoft, to use closed environments. The second piece is, I think Matt alluded to this in a previous answer that he gave, which is a lot of the problems around deploying AI within your SaaS application are like solved technology problems. So, for example, you have permissioning in your product, like we have permissioning in our product. So whatever kind of results we're delivering that within the existing permissioned environment that the law firms set up. And same with, so I think that's like a kind of second piece. And then the third piece, which I think is in the question, is maybe referring, and hi Darcy, maybe referring to like when you're looking at the whole data set of the law firm, what data is being used to deliver results, depending on whatever the application is that you're trying to achieve. And that's something where I think law firms do have to be quite thoughtful. It's not a problem that we've encountered, because we're approaching like specific data sets and serving that to specific permissioned silos of people. But I think that is something to be aware of, especially when I think there's a lot of like kind of generic like legal LLMs that are out there that are promising a lot of different kind of applications and use cases. And surely this is an area where law firms do need to be a bit sensitive around who are they delivering information to, and what kind of information is that, and what information has that, where does that come from? And I don't know if you've seen, just in a kind of like a non-legal context, a few things flying around chatbots, for example, for DPD, where you know, you can manipulate that. You can either expose like previous prompts. There's things you can do if the security measures aren't properly in place, or the parameters around prompts haven't been properly set. And so I think there's lots of places you can go wrong here. But I think if you're, again, it comes back to the buy versus build decision, and like, are you trying this for the first time, or are you going with a vendor or supplier who's actually thought about the parameters, thought about the permissions, doing this in a closed environment? And at some point, maybe law firms will solve those problems in-house, and that's like equally valid. They'll go on the same learning journey.
I do think it's so helpful to look at previous, you know, when we get caught. I mean, these conversations, I'm not saying they're not important around, obviously, absolutely have to be clear, and law firms are custodians of clients' data, right? So, but it's really interesting when you look at previous examples of times when we've had sort of complete step changes, like with the use of email, where we were told that lawyers would never use it, and there were definitely possibilities that data would be breached. I'm sorry, would be sort of misshared and you know, shared with the wrong people. And that's still the case. That still happens, right? But it doesn't mean that we shouldn't use it. I mean, some of these analogies for me personally are really helpful in terms of how you put it in perspective. Like, they're really important, but we have other technologies where we also, which have been absolutely groundbreaking, where we've had to get over these, you know, find ways to, and actually with email, we've only really quite recently managed to get over this, like this sort of problem of sharing data with the wrong people. That's really helpful.
I would also say, I mean, you know, most people will be using AI in their day-to-day life, not just by using the consumer facing, ChatGPT interface, but actually like in your emails, there's like, there's, every Outlook, Microsoft, Google, everyone's using AI within their, so this isn't, I think you don't, there's the scary kind of like, oh, it's new, but there's also, you're already using it every single day. And so I think this will become table stakes to the extent people don't feel like it's table stakes, very quickly. And I think the last question in the chat, the one at the bottom is how comfortable are clients using the products? We've delivered this as an opt-in feature, and we have had 100% adoption across nearly 300, our 300 client base, and that has surprised us. So we expected clients to be slower to adopt, but fundamentally, you can see something as AI, or you can see something as like a feature that makes your life a little bit easier. And I think that's where we land.
I'm going to ask you to be brief because I'm not doing a good job of racketing through all of these questions, right? We're going to try and get through them. And if you've got questions, please keep them short. But so AI and Legal's product, she understands that AI and Legal's products could speed up processes and will be able to complete a level of screening of PEP sanctions, etc. How would the product assist in terms of verification of client documentation and ID verification of clients' beneficial owners, while keeping in mind guidance and ML Regs 2017? It's very specific, as obtaining documentation is the biggest challenge for solicitors. Someone answer that quickly. Can you do it in like?
Yeah, the two bullets are like, we do that today. Lots of that's actually using machine learning that's not predates sort of Gen AI application within our product. And some of that is increasingly the collection of information, I think, is an area where AI is going to be really exciting. But now we've long automated that pre Gen AI. So the LSAG guidance actively encourages the use of electronic means of verification. And I think what we're seeing is, from a regulatory perspective, if you're not using electronic kind of means of doing kind of basic compliance tasks, probably the question you're going to get is why not, rather than why. So that's what we see. I don't know, Crispin, if there's anything to add to that.
I think that's an interesting example of the journey, isn't it? That at first goes back to the question about how do you regulate. At first, people want permission, but actually, if regulators keep out, eventually it becomes a standard on how you comply. And it doesn't mean that you then have to force it. It just becomes the standard that customers expect, and it becomes just an industry standard. And it's how markets can drive the right standards, and it doesn't always have to be a regulator top down.
Okay. So there's a question around copyright and IP. Oh, do we need to be aware of that in AI? Yes, but it's a really, to me personally, that's a separate topic. So in light of time, I'm very happy to engage with you direct on that, though. If you've got any questions that we can follow up after the webinar. Other than CDD, what are Legal's Gen AI capabilities that your customers can all currently benefit from? What exciting stuff are you working on for the future? Can we have an exclusive here, please?
I think we touched on that a little bit earlier. The bullet points are really around everything from making decision making more determinative and more reducing analyst time, to thinking about the end-to-end risk journey in a way that actually maybe hasn't been thought of, or hasn't been delivered by sounds very grandiose, hasn't been delivered by a software provider before, but actually there's a lot of stuff that we're launching at the moment, which is really around these disparate data sources where there's a lot of decision making, there's a lot of manual processes and/or kind of human intervention and human decision making that we can't totally remove, because obviously at the end of the day, a firm has to be responsible for their risk decisions, but we can remove a lot of the analysis that has to go into that, and a lot of the back and forth with clients, and a lot of the understanding of where does any decision sit within the regulatory environment and the firm's risk policies.
Do you train across organizations? There's a question. Do you train? And are firms comfortable with?
No is the short answer.
Let's keep it that. Can you address ROI?
We talked about it a little bit earlier in relation to our product specifically, and I think one of the really exciting things is being able to see like the A/B test of pre using Gen AI and post using Gen AI. We can actually see the product data of like time taken. But some of the, and I mentioned some of the customer feedback around like reducing drop-off rates really significantly, which is frankly like an unintended consequence, a positive unintended consequence. But I think in terms of assessing your own law firm's like implementation piece and assessing ROI within that, the way that we built our hypotheses around what did we want to test using Gen AI applications was what's going to have the highest value for the customer, and we actually put like not quantitative values against that, and that's how we essentially stack ranked what we explored, and then we now are testing like did when we deliver that, does it actually stack up to the ROI we thought it would deliver? So I think it depends on any given use case, but a lot of the ones that we're thinking about are, you know, time to value for the law firm, getting clients in the door faster, reducing like low value time on the part of fee earners or on the part of administrative staff. We're thinking a lot around how do you generate revenue faster? How do you generate more revenue? But it could be, you know, like employee NPS can also be one, like, does this make your employees' lives better? So it just depends on what ROI I think is valuable for your firm, your organization, your use case.
I would add to that. I think if you're a consumer-facing law firm, then speed and ease of engaging the lawyer and the firm is as important as whether it's cheaper to deliver. You know, customers search online, and if they can go through the process quickly and get advice quickly, so you have to be able to back it up with your delivery capabilities, not just your onboarding capabilities. You've got a genuine market differentiator, because, you know, customers get so frustrated with, yes, I can help you, and it's 3 weeks before I get to speak to anyone, and it's, you know, it's taken several hours of my time. So being able to not just shorten the cost, the time and the cost, but back it up with fast delivery of the service the customer's chosen you for is, to me, the really important bit to focus on return on investment.
I've not got through half the questions I was going to ask you. I think we run out of time, really. Was there anything amongst you guys? We've got 3 minutes. But you know, was there anything that we haven't touched on that you think is really important that you would say, do you know what, if I could convey one thing that I'd wanted to convey to the people listening in, this would have been it? Perhaps I can go around each of you, and then unfortunately we're going to have to close and say thank you to everyone for being so brilliant. But so start with Julia. Is there one thing in the journey that you're seeing, you know, that you say, right, have you thought about this, or are you doing this, or whatever? Like, I know it's a long question, but what would you say?
I'd say, honestly, if there was a training question, but I'd say we're super happy always to like hop on and show you some of the nuts and bolts of it, because for me, the biggest aha moment was when we experimented with something, and within, you know, a couple of hours, you can build something that is very transformative to show what is possible. Not a perfect product or not something you give to customers or anything like that, but like playing with the actual APIs is I think, for a layperson like me, I don't come from a technology background, it's really transformative to open up the aperture almost of what you can see from it. So if you don't have access to that, or if you wanted to just hop on a half-hour call, I'm sure Matt's not busy at all. That kind of thing is really cool. That kind of thing is really cool.
I totally agree with that, and I think just looking at all of the sort of novel and interesting applications of generative AI technologies in different ways. Although there's sort of an explosion of products, I still think there's a lot of immature stuff and a lot of things you can learn by looking at how people are using the technologies in just very different ways, because it is quite a powerful and broad tool, as we talked about before, that can do lots of interesting things. So I think having some understanding of that, and that allows you to see, okay, what are the opportunities and problems that could be solved, whether that's in-house or third party, or by, you know, making changes to your existing stack. But yeah.
Thank you. I can agree more. I think if you're not doing that already, just definitely, I think that was almost like last year's conversation. Hopefully people are really experimenting and learning and playing around and getting familiar and not being scared, and within a safe environment. Crispin.
I think I'd say break it down into two things and two horizons. Don't sack all your lawyers and think that technology is going to replace them this week, but do spend the odd evening and weekend scouring the web to find out what the maddest ideas are and what might this mean for your business and your individual practice as an attorney over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years through to the end of your career. But spend your days at work also thinking about what are the bits of grit in my customer's journey and my staff's journey in meeting my customers' needs, and how might there be tools out there that are emerging or already available that can get rid of those bits of grit, and can I make them into a differentiator for my business?
I'm just looking to, so it sounds like people would like another sort of 30-minute very practical session. I think yeah, Julia's nodding, we can do that. We've got to go though. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. I love it when people really get involved and ask loads of questions. It means that I didn't get to half my questions, but I think the panel would prefer to be asking the questions that you have rather than the ones that we made up. So yeah, thanks to you all as well, and thanks for all your thanks. Thanks to Crispin, thanks to Julia, thanks to Matt. We can follow up over Teams or email, what have you, if you've got further questions, and we may be able to set up an actual demo session as well. So that remains to say goodbye. Thank you.
Thanks all. Bye.
Thanks
Bye.
all. Bye.